Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev entered history as the two leaders who, more than anyone else in the late 20th century, transformed the dynamics of the Cold War and set the stage for its peaceful conclusion. When Reagan entered the White House in 1981, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a tense and dangerous standoff, with both powers expanding their nuclear arsenals and accusing each other of destabilizing global security. Reagan was known for his hardline rhetoric, calling the Soviet Union an evil empire and launching an ambitious military buildup, including the controversial Strategic Defense Initiative, which aimed to develop a missile defense system in space. Yet behind the aggressive posture was a leader who believed that the Cold War could be ended through American strength, followed by negotiation. Gorbachev, who became General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985, represented a completely new type of Soviet leader, younger, more flexible, and more openly critical of the inefficiencies of the Soviet system. He introduced the policies of perestroika and glasnost to modernize the economy and open Soviet society. He also recognized that the arms race was economically unsustainable and that meaningful dialogue with the United States was essential. The first meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev took place in Geneva in 1985 and marked the beginning of a relationship that would evolve from mutual suspicion to genuine cooperation. Although no major agreements were signed at Geneva, the summit opened a door to future progress by establishing direct communication and a shared commitment to reducing the risk of nuclear war. The next encounter, the Reykjavik Summit in 1986, was one of the most dramatic diplomatic events of the Cold War. What began as a routine meeting unexpectedly turned into an ambitious discussion about eliminating all nuclear weapons. The talks ultimately collapsed because neither side could agree on the future of the Strategic Defense Initiative, but Reykjavik demonstrated that both leaders were willing to consider unprecedented reductions. It served as the foundation for what would come next, the first real breakthrough in nuclear arms control. In 1987, after intensive negotiations, Reagan and Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF, a historic agreement that eliminated an entire category of nuclear missiles, including the American Pershing II and the Soviet SS-20s, and established rigorous on-site inspections. This was the first time in history that the superpowers agreed not just to limit, but to completely eliminate nuclear weapons, and it represented a profound shift in Cold War policy. The signing ceremony in Washington became a symbol of a new era in U.S.-Soviet relations, one in which dialogue and verification replaced threats and fear. Over the next few years, the relationship between the two leaders continued to deepen. Reagan, once deeply suspicious of Soviet intentions, publicly recognized Gorbachev as a partner in peace, while Gorbachev saw in Reagan a leader who was willing to move beyond ideological confrontation. Their cooperation extended beyond arms control to issues such as regional conflicts, human rights, and the future of Europe. By the time they met again in Moscow in 1988, the atmosphere had drastically changed. The two leaders walked together through Red Square, surrounded by ordinary citizens, signaling to the world that the Cold War was truly thawing. The Moscow summit reaffirmed the commitments of the INF Treaty and advanced the discussions that would later lead to the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START, although START itself would be finalized only after Reagan left office. The cumulative impact of the Reagan-Gorbachev agreements went far beyond the documents they signed. Their dialogue reduced global nuclear tension, reshaped the strategic landscape, and encouraged political transformations across Eastern Europe. As Gorbachev's reforms accelerated and Soviet control weakened, movements for freedom emerged in the Eastern Bloc, contributing to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Reagan's insistence that the Cold War could end through strength combined with negotiation met Gorbachev's vision of a reformed, more open Soviet Union and the convergence of their approaches created a rare historical moment in which ideological enemies managed to trust each other enough to dismantle the most dangerous weapons on Earth. Although historians continue to debate which leader contributed more, the reality is that the agreements were the product of their unique interaction. Reagan's determination to pressure the Soviet system until it engaged seriously, and Gorbachev's willingness to rethink Soviet doctrine and accept genuine limits on military power. Their cooperation showed that personal diplomacy could overcome decades of hostility. By the time Reagan left office in 1989, and even more clearly after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, it was evident that the agreements between the two men had changed world history. They had not only reduced the nuclear threat, but also helped create the conditions for the peaceful end of the Cold War. The Reagan-Gorbachev era remains a powerful example of how dialogue, when combined with political courage and mutual respect, can reshape the destiny of nations. Their legacy is not simply a collection of treaties, but the demonstration that even the most entrenched geopolitical rivalries can be transformed when leaders are willing to challenge long-held assumptions and communicate openly. The psychological shift they created was as important as the technical arrangements themselves. After decades marked by fear of sudden nuclear annihilation, the world began to imagine a future where cooperation outweighed confrontation. Their meetings humanized the adversary in the eyes of both nations, slowly eroding the propaganda-driven image of the other side as inherently dangerous or irrational. Reagan and Gorbachev showed that negotiation did not require ideological surrender, but rather a recognition of shared interests, such as survival, stability, and the desire for prosperity. This shift influenced not only policymakers, but also public opinion, reducing anti-Soviet and anti-American sentiment and encouraging cultural and scientific exchanges. These interactions helped build trust at lower levels of society, reinforcing the diplomatic progress made at the top. Even after the Soviet Union collapsed, the spirit of the Reagan-Gorbachev era continued to shape international relations, serving as a reference point for subsequent arms control efforts and for leaders seeking to diffuse major tensions. Their story is often cited today as an example of what can be achieved when statesmen take risks for peace and refuse to accept that conflict is inevitable.